Good morning, Kyle Schulberg.
Morning, Mr. Fishman. Good to see you.
Mr. Fishman. Mr. Fishman is my late dad.
Okay, Ronan.
Kyle, I've been meaning to do this podcast with you for quite some time. You're a tough man to track down, rightfully so. I'm probably going to butcher your credentialing, but you'll let us know what your credentials are. You are the chief of staff to a county in South Florida.
County commissioner.
County commissioner. See this? So I told you I would butcher it.
Yep.
Your resume is quite vast, and most of the premise of the podcast kind of goes along a couple of folds. It goes towards being a resource for people looking to move to South Florida, not specifically from Canada. It's really evolved into, majority of, it's now we're in 5 countries, and, people are listening for a variety of reasons. And we interview people that could be a resource for them. And most of them, the overwhelming majority thus far, have been transplants to Florida. You, on the other hand, are what we refer to as a Florida unicorn. You're like 3rd or 4th or 5th generation.
4th on one side, 3rd on the other.
Yeah, so. Which is like Florida's a major melting pot.
Yeah.
So you could provide the audience, the listeners, a sober, real perspective on how much Florida has changed.
Oh, absolutely.
The realities of what it's like on the ground from every single angle, from safety, economics, schooling, medical. Like we could probably talk for days, and we've chatted, but
many.
But what I have to let everybody know is, you were one of the first people I met coming down here. You and your family were super kind to us from the beginning. Like, I asked a lot of really stupid questions. I still do.
There's no stupid questions.
Yeah, but you know what? Not everybody has to take the time to answer them. Yeah. Not everybody has to be there to support somebody. And you had no intent except for being a good human, right? And that kind of stuff is critical when people are uprooting their entire lives. So to that, I'm grateful. I really appreciate it sincerely from the bottom of my heart. I know you're not here on a professional capacity. You're not a county staffer or whatever the exact term is.
Not speaking on behalf of anybody, just my own personal thoughts.
Right.
Today.
And that's what people want to hear. That's what people need to hear. And that's what's been a major resource to me just as an individual. I talk to you about everything from politics, not necessarily Canadian and U.S. We've gone on certain tangents, and you have a really interesting background and perspective. The one that I think strikes me the most is the one where you referred to me as, what was it? It was Republican light or what am I?
Yeah, like Republican light, or you think you're a Republican, but you're really a Democrat. Yes.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
So, there are people that are going to be listening to this.
And I call BS because, there are some viewpoints that you have, stated to me that are much more would be on one side than the other.
Sure.
If you were on the U.S. side of politics.
And what's ironic is that I think that I fall into a major group, like probably overwhelming majority. If there was like a centrist party within the United States, I think they would like smash the competition.
For a long time, I've thought the same thing, except for when you look at overwhelming elections, you look at, when they put up somebody in the center, for instance, whether they have a D or an R next to it, immaterial, but you look at centrists that have come before, and they say, oh, we're going to create an own party or whatever, and then you get people still voting at the polls on one side or the other. And a lot of it, as a political scientist in nature, because that's what my degree is in, also have a religious studies degree too.
Oh, wow.
But as a political scientist, you look at this and, it's like the whole lost vote syndrome. You don't want to vote for something you don't think is going to win. And so people will still vote Democrat, Republican, no matter what.
Never heard that term, lost vote syndrome.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
It's something to think about, yeah. But realistically, and, you look at some states like Maine is one of them that now has this ranked choice voting. And where if your top 2 candidates in an election don't win, or I forget what the principle is, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but basically if one of yours doesn't make the top 2, your third choice becomes your vote, and it's like an automatic runoff, and therefore they're saying that might help maybe elevate some other parties into the conversation, because people won't be like, well, if I don't vote, I'm just going to be one of 10% that voted for X candidate.
Right. So it'd be a lost vote.
Right. Exactly. So,
Okay. Now, how long have you been around the political sphere in Florida?
a long time. I started as an intern in college. Well, let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
Okay, so politically, I started working in politics. First job in politics was an internship in college in Massachusetts.
Okay.
I'm from Florida, obviously.
Where from in Florida?
From Miami.
Okay.
So born and raised. My grandfather on one side, his father came down from Chicago back in the 40s. They opened up an Army-Navy surplus store on Flagler Street.
And yet you're not into guns.
Yeah, well, I know how to shoot guns from the other grandfather, who was a sharpshooter in the military.
Am I allowed to ask whether you own any firearms?
You can. I don't
Okay.
currently, but I grew up, going out shooting BB guns and pellet guns and all that sort of stuff too. So
Sure.
not unfamiliar. But yeah, so one grandfather, the family started this Army Navy. And the other grandfather was career military, helped build the Star Island Coast Guard base. And if you're a boater,
I intend to be.
Yes. So you know how they put the pylons into the sand,
Yes.
where they put the channel markers?
I've always wondered how they do that.
He's the one who invented how they do that.
Wow.
Yeah. So back in the day, they were putting in the first streetlights in Coral Gables at the time. And as the story goes, he was driving down from his house to go to the base, sees them drilling these in. He says, why can't I put that on a barge? And so he helped get the appropriation. They put it on a thing and put it in. And then he actually helped with several other inventors come up with how they put the signs up, because they used to just be painted and attached to weights. So you get a storm through, they blow away.
Sure.
No channels. And birds would sit on it and shit on the thing, and
which is a problem.
And would whitewash the paint. So
Right.
they helped come up with the first reflectives, and those are there. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So, anyways, to get back to your original question.
Yeah.
Grew up down here. Was always kind of involved. My parents were not involved really
Politically.
but I always was very involved with different things in school, whether student council, whatever.
Sure.
And then in college, got involved with College Democrats in Massachusetts at my school, which was Stonehill College. Got an internship, I guess this was 2006 election, with Senator Nelson down here in Florida, was running against arch-evil enemy Catherine Harris, who you may remember or not remember, was the Secretary of State of Florida during the contested 2000 election between Gore and Bush.
Yeah. Did Gore actually win?
Yes. If
Really?
you actually look at the counts that have come out since, and they've been redone, he probably did win. But,
oh my God.
yeah.
But
it was that close, So, and, you don't see that civility in politics a lot. But, he conceded because he thought it was what was best for the country. You can say either way, whether Bush was great or whatever,
Well, that would have changed things so much. I mean, just his position on climate change then.
Alone, yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's now on the forefront, what it would have done. Can you imagine?
Oh, well, there's different. I mean, obviously 9/11 probably still happens, but you might not have the Iraq War as well, which would be a completely different geopolitically. I mean, there's a lot of different things. But you talk about, looking at that, and it's definitely interesting. So anyways, started with Senator Nelson, led the signature drive with Ted Kennedy to get him on the ballot in Massachusetts, because you have to get signatures to get folks on the ballot. You can't pay to get on the ballot like in Florida. So that's a different thing here. I don't know if you know this, but basically,
I do not know
in
this.
Florida, the law is you can pay a filing fee, get on the ballot, or you can collect enough signatures, depends on what, electoral race you're in, Senate, president. I mean, there's different levels, state representative, it could be 2,000 signatures, could be 100,000. I mean, they list them out there on the site. Anyways, but in Massachusetts, everybody has to get signatures.
How many?
I think it was like 30,000, 20,000,
That's a lot.
somewhere in there. But anyways, our claim to fame at the school was I led the group to get the most signatures for Kennedy over Harvard
Cool.
at the time. So we were very, very pleased. And the senator, it was his last race, came to Stonehill, got to meet him, which was actually kind of interesting because he had met my grandfather on one side, my mother's side, but way back when he had first started in the 60s. And my grandfather's his final post commanding the Coast Guard in Boston for the East Coast, and a pipe had burst over his head in his office, and he came down and swapped the deck, and there was a little news story. And from then on, Kennedy had sent him a Christmas card, so I kind of got to say hello. And
How long has your family been in the United States?
well, that is a long question from both sides.
So that long?
Well, it depends. It depends. So my dad's side, it's probably early 1900s. You know, you got the whole Ellis Island stuff.
Sure.
And they came out of Ukraine area. I forget the port name. I think it's Odessa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then, you know, they've got the whole paper. I forget the dates, but yeah. So they came over. My mom is adopted, so, you know, but her family, the adoptive family is, you know, long term. Like her mom, her dad was a preacher, Southern Baptist preacher. They went from Georgia to Texas, and you know, basically she got married on a blind date, after a blind date, I should say, to my grandfather, who was in the military, and
Seems
during
to have
World
worked
War II. Yeah, they were married for ever, like a long, long time. They were until both passed. Basically.
So you've got a real,
yeah.
like, deep-rooted, patriotic American history.
Well, and my grandfather, just to conclude the thought,
No.
he was a first-generation American, though, Dutch American.
Okay.
So
Is that the Mayflower thing?
no, but he grew up in New Jersey. So yeah,
Shows my lack of understanding of American history. Although my kids seem to be learning it real quick and teaching it to me at home, right? So it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
Like, Americans are very patriotic.
they're very patriotic, but it's definitely interesting to see the cliques within the patriotism too.
Sure,
you
of
look
course.
at different things, and I might be being a little controversial in saying that, but
I don't think so at all. I think people don't realize the amount of people in the United States, the amount of opinions and
variety of
perspectives.
backgrounds.
Sure. So you're gonna organically get that.
Yeah.
The thing that I find most baffling in what I'd say is one of the last true democracies on planet Earth, and there are a few countries, you know, although there's two parties, there are like thousands of subsects and cliques within it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at the different parties, you look at between progressives, you've got Tea Partiers, you've got centrists. I mean,
Right.
it runs the gamut. And just because you think one has a D next to its name doesn't mean it's always, you know, look at Joe Manchin versus, I'm trying to think who I could put up there. I mean, you look at Tim Kaine, or you look at, you know, from Virginia, or you look at Elizabeth Warren, you
Right.
know, in the Democratic side, and then you go over and you look at Tommy Tuberville on the right versus, trying to think, Mitt Romney, for instance. You know, I mean, that's like two different universes,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
it's definitely interesting.
All right. So you've been in politics for like about 20 years,
Close to 15, I'd say.
15 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe a little longer. Yeah.
You have watched, being in Florida and a local Floridian and originally Miami.
Yeah.
Do you still live in Miami-Dade?
No, I'm in Fort Lauderdale now.
Okay, and that's Broward County.
That is Broward.
All
So
right.
you got your tri-county area for reference for all those listening, which is Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach.
Okay.
Right?
So you've watched this crazy evolution, and probably during COVID, and it's still going now. You've seen this influx of people coming in from all over the world. I'd say predominantly from within the United States, and I'm going to probably venture a guess to say predominantly from the West Coast into Florida.
Say probably more northeast.
Okay. All right. You'd be able to speak to that better than me. That's just my perspective
Yeah.
from my little world of the people that I see moving in.
Sure.
And you've seen it probably like gasoline on the flame during COVID because there was an influx. Talk to me about, the pros of the evolution, if there are any, the cons, and just if you can elaborate on how much South Florida has changed in your time, and for good and bad.
Well, absolutely. I'm going to start a little bit earlier than this, and we'll get to that part real quick. So I grew up in Miami, as we referenced before. So for those of you that don't recall or don't know from up north, I mean, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, very different, although they are three of the biggest counties in Florida. Population-wise, you have a lot of Latin American countries that have contributed to population down in Miami-Dade. So, you have, I don't know if it's Hispanic majority, but, pretty close to it. If you are not a Spanish speaker in Miami-Dade, it is fairly hard in a lot of ways because you're trying to bridge the gap between folks that have just arrived, folks that have been there for a long time. Business is done in English, but you need both languages generally, in my opinion, to be fairly successful, unless you're in certain sectors like medical or whatever.
And why do you think Miami-Dade is the recipient as opposed to Broward or Palm Beach?
I think you've got communities there that are already well established.
Sure.
In Miami-Dade. Growing up in Dade, you had, obviously, whether it was Mariel or which was the boat lift in the 1980s, or you had, the Cuban Revolution, which sent Cuban exiles here. And then from there, my dad grew up in Westchester. Well, Westchester used to be predominantly Jewish, etc. Now it's predominantly Nicaraguan, Honduran, and different Central American countries, plus Cuban and other groups from Latin America. And that's kind of just been the progression as well. You've got those communities that are established, like 8th Street, Calle Ocho, world famous, right?
Right.
It's different. Then you move up to Broward, right? And Broward is a lot different from Miami-Dade in a lot of ways.
What would you say the major differentiating points
Well,
are?
population, you look at demographics.
Okay.
Whether that's white, African-American, even Hispanic. Hispanic is growing in Broward.
Okay.
If you look at the most current demographics that came out in the census in 2020.
Right.
Okay, which was probably done a lot before some of the demographic changes, though, that we're going to see from COVID in the next 10 years, because they don't do the census every year. They do it every 10 years here in the United States.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's every 10 years. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in 2030 when, they have that adjustment.
Sure.
And then Palm Beach, obviously, you've got Boca Raton and, West Palm, but it's a little more, like the similar demographics you would see within most United States, communities at this point. Nationwide, as far as demographically. Still probably a little more diverse, but probably closer in percentages.
That's in Broward, a little more.
No, Palm Beach.
Okay.
A little more diverse in Broward. Like, basically, as you go from Dade up, it changes,
Sure.
A little bit more. So, and I also think Broward, comparatively to Miami-Dade, you've got, you've got some suburbia to Miami-Dade,
Right.
Which would be like Pembroke Pines and, Miramar and those southern cities, Hallandale, where they commute into Miami-Dade.
For work?
For work, but they go back every day.
Is the office hubs, is the towers, the skyscrapers, the big, is there more work, professional work within Miami-Dade than there is in Broward?
I wouldn't say that. I'd say you probably, when I look at, advertising for, let's say, the F1 race that you recently saw that was down here, or you look at the Stanley Cup playoffs, or you look at, Miami Dolphins,
Sure.
Everybody thinks, I'm going to South Beach, right?
Yeah. Well,
or I'm going to downtown Miami. Well, the reality is you have 4 distinct cities if you don't group West Palm and Boca together, right? So depending on that, but Fort Lauderdale is an hour north of Miami. You have a lot of
Is that with traffic or without traffic? Because it makes a big difference.
Well, yeah, it makes a big difference. Although the Bright Line, which is up and running now, that train that goes from downtown to downtown to downtown now stops in Boca, actually.
Okay. Is that a new stop?
They just opened it.
Right.
So I forget where it is here.
Does it save a lot of time?
Oh, yeah. Because it's 30 minutes for each leg.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
And now they're going to open it. They're just opening up purchases for the routes to go to Orlando on the high-speed train.
Oh, that would be cool.
For Disneyland or Disney World, excuse me, and it's supposed to go over to Tampa as well. So,
how long is it from where we're sitting here to go to Tampa? Just out of curiosity, I'm sure I can Google that. Just
like 4 hours.
I'm just trying to think
whether on the road. I mean, it depends on traffic.
Watch the Leafs play the Lightning. How long is it going to be there? I don't like.
That's if that's I don't know if I'd want to do that and spend my money on that, but
right. No, of course you've got the Panthers here, which are closer, but
go Panthers. Except for gosh, killing me.
Look, I can tell you that a lot of people listening look at South Florida as South Beach. Yep. Fort Lauderdale, those east communities Correct. That are on the ocean, and if they're snowbirds or if they're here temporarily, most likely they're closer towards the water,
sure,
than they are deeper in, which is the communities that you're talking about.
Yep.
Now, you've seen an evolution within just by the influx of people. Has each one of these counties encountered this overwhelming growth?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you just look at the numbers. I mean, from a development standpoint, you look at Broward County, for instance, or we can take Palm Beach.
Sure.
Broward is basically built out.
So
there's not a lot of available land, right? But Palm Beach there is. Or Dade, like you look, if you're driving south on the turnpike to the Florida Keys, that all used to be farmland. Now you're seeing
all built out,
being built out. Yeah, I mean, you'll see some farms, but it's getting built. Let's put it that way. So
usually when I hear things, it's all built out. There isn't space.
Sure.
I'm gonna automatically assume that the cost of living is gone up.
It has.
And affordability has gone up. When lack of inventory, there's more demand, less supply. So where are people going that cannot afford within, these communities that you're talking about? Where are they going?
Well, it's the tough question that we deal with daily in South Florida. All right. If you look at what you need to earn to, let's say, what is it supposed to be? 30% of your income is the top rent, right?
Ideally.
Or something along that. And otherwise you're overburdened, right?
Yeah.
And in South Florida, if you're a teacher, for instance.
What is the average teacher
I think they start at $47,000, a public school teacher, right? I think. Approximately. Don't quote me, but, there's no way. I mean, you look at...
Why no way? What was the average one-bedroom or two-bedroom going to run them? And tell me where.
So let's just say you want to be in a safe neighborhood.
That's my next point.
Walkable, in a good, close to downtown or...
Schooling.
Or like just a little bit out. Well, schooling, I mean, it just depends on this. That's kind of a difference, I think, too, from Canada in a lot of ways. Our districts are a lot bigger, I want to say.
Sure.
You guys,
significantly.
It's much smaller, much more micro. We're a more macro school district. It's by the county. So, which is different in different states, by the way. But I'll get to that in 1 second. Sorry, remind me where we were on that.
So I'm talking about affordability.
So on affordability, if you look at the average, I believe it's, somewhere around $50,000 a year. If you look nationwide, for income. And you look here, it probably mirrors it somewhat. You got a lot of people that have to either pick up an extra job or they're, overburdened, or, you have a dual income house, right? So they're able to afford it, but it's not comfortable.
So they're stretched.
That has changed drastically. I can give you the example of when I first moved down here after college. This was 2008. A a 1-bedroom apartment, I was paying $900
1 bedroom.
a month.
Okay.
And I was in a decent area in Miami called Kendall.
Yes.
And convenient to everything, right? That was a 1-bedroom. If you factor that out, when we moved up here, that 1-bedroom apartment, we got a 2-bedroom when we moved up here, and we were paying somewhere around $1,400.
Wow. Okay.
So you think about the way the rent has gone
Sure.
up, and obviously if you're going to buy a house, you're competing against a lot of cash buyers, right? You're in the real estate game, this. So it makes it difficult for the average person to purchase a house. You got to find a good agent, obviously.
Sure.
Like yourself.
I know. I had a horrible experience.
Yeah, and there's craziness to it, right? So
craziness is an understatement, but that was not an anomaly,
right?
To South Florida.
That's everywhere.
Yeah, across the board. The difference between South Florida and other markets, and I'm involved in several.
Yeah.
I could say that South Florida has held up. Values have held up. Prices have held up. The competition slowed down, but it's held up. And that's because there's still this wave, a crush of people coming down. I know from the Canadian side, the visas are backlogged.
So historically, if you look at this area, you always had people moving here. The growth, I forget the stat, don't quote me, but it's gone up since air conditioning was invented here. I mean, let's just think about it for a minute. The moment you have air conditioning came in the 40s and 50s, whenever it was invented right in there, population has started to steadily go up, right? Because it became not just a winter place, it's a place you could spend your summers. Right? When it's devastatingly hot, although a lot of people leave in the summer.
Sure.
On vacations. So
yeah.
But we accommodate that because we're very well connected. You have international flights, you've got all the things that you need to get away, right? But the growth has constantly gone up. Mainly, you hear the joke that we're a part of New York or we're a part of Boston or whatever. And different areas have different migration patterns. Southwest Florida has a lot of folks from New England. And you go to over here, you're more New York, right?
Sure.
And now Canadian.
Thank God.
And some Russians too, down in Sunny Isles.
Yeah, I've been to Sunny Isles, and it's wild. Like, I was on the beaches there, and not a lick of English.
Yeah.
Like, actually not. And then if you cross into Miami-Dade, you're talking about Spanish being overwhelming, right?
Right.
And I don't think people realize how much of a melting pot South Florida really is. And
it's a good thing, by the way.
Well, that's what I was going to ask your opinion on, but I know that Canada is considered as a melting pot culturally from a variety of different angles, and that's because immigration is vast and important.
So immigration is very important, okay, to the United States. The United States, quite frankly, could not survive without immigration in a lot of ways.
Sure.
You look at whether it's agriculturally or, industry-wise,
right, or
medical. I mean, a lot of doctors are foreign trained. That you see.
Now, when you say immigration, are you talking, and I really don't have a strong understanding of this, so I want to get your perspective on it.
Sure.
And again, I get it's your personal opinion, not a political stance that you're about to take. And I really want to know.
Sure.
When you talk about immigration, are you talking about legal or illegal or both?
Well, it depends. That is a very complicated question, first of all.
Dumb it down for me.
Okay. So there are buzzwords that are thrown around here in the United States: illegal immigration, legal, right?
Sure.
Okay. They're supposed to get your blood to boil or not boil, depending on who you are and where you're from. The point I'd like to make, personally, I've worked in congressional settings where in Miami-Dade, where immigration is a very personal thing for a lot of folks. A lot of folks come here undocumented.
Is that considered illegal then?
That is considered
What's
illegal.
Undocumented? Somebody who literally walked across the border
it could be
seeking asylum?
It could be somebody who walked across the border. It could be somebody who took a boat over here from Haiti or from Cuba or one of the Caribbean countries. It could be somebody who swam across the Rio Grande to avoid narco-terrorists. I mean, it runs the gamut. For the most part, when you get folks that come here undocumented, it's not because they're trying to break the law, it's because they either fear for their life, their economics are bad, or they're trying to get asylum. Okay? I have no problem with folks who want to come here. Obviously, legally is better, through the process. The process is very long, though.
And expensive.
And from a lot of countries, you don't have that option. You don't have the money or what have you. Or it's a years-long process where sometimes you're waiting 10 to 20 years.
Sure.
And, there's a phrase, and I will butcher it, but, you look at the Statue of Liberty, right? I forget the full phrase, but give me your tired, give me your weak.
Yeah.
You know the phrase. And the moment that America can't uphold that phrase to those who are in trouble, distressed, I don't know what we're doing here at that point. It shouldn't just be because you can afford to come here or I can afford to come here. This is a great country with many opportunities for all levels of the country and the economy for folks to participate. You have a lot of jobs that are unfilled in this country, quite frankly, because we can't get somebody to do them.
So I know you've referred to me as Republican light, and I know the Republican stance on immigration is quite staunch.
It can be.
And
it depends. Are you Susan Collins, or are you Lisa Murkowski, or are you Mitt Romney?
I'm neither one of those people, and I'll tell you my humble perspective on things. Yeah. I took the legal, expensive route for what I believe is the land of opportunity. Mm-hmm. I'm extremely grateful for Canada to allow me the position to be able to grow professionally and otherwise, to be able to have the opportunity to try and experiment and come across the border here in the right way.
Absolutely.
My parents are immigrants escaping originally from the former Soviet Union, via Israel into Canada, and now I'm here. So, I think immigration, and again, people assume that I'm quite conservative and right-leaning. I couldn't agree with you more about having a place to go if your intentions are pure and your intentions are to run away from countries and locations that are unsafe.
Would harm your family.
Yeah, of course. And there's so many of them.
If your son was in that same thing, you'd be the same way.
I would do anything in my power to bring it down. And unfortunately, people look at the ones coming across the border and they paint them all with the same brush because of the small but very loud minority of people that are here to do bad. And that applies for every country on earth. And it's not fair to those people.
Many things, too.
Sure, of course.
But I will also point out to you, too, and, our Congress and federal government has not done us right for many years, both parties, when it comes to immigration.
Why? What does that mean?
Well, you look at when comprehensive immigration reform, the last time they made any changes was during Reagan.
Oh, okay. Oh,
how long ago was that?
Yeah, well, Reaganomics.
You get my point.
Yeah.
The point is that we're talking about an issue within a lens, and the rules were written in the 80s, not in the 2000s, not in 2020.
Sure.
Every time a bill comes up.
Why do you think that is?
Because nobody wants to work together up there on this sort of issue. Because if somebody on the right says, I'm okay with these provisions, they're pegged as soft on immigration. If somebody on the left says, I want some more restrictions, then they're pegged as, well, you're not for, poor people who are coming here who want a better life.
All right. So I want your perspective on this. And I might not get it dead on, but this is what I've read.
Sure.
There was a lot of immigration. I think it was illegal immigration. And there were buses coming across the border. And some landed in...
when? Sorry.
This is fairly recently, I believe. And then...
There weren't buses coming across the border.
No, there were people coming across the border.
People coming across, right? Yes.
And then they showed up in Florida. And
They never showed up in Florida.
Really? Because I heard this story about Governor DeSantis putting them on buses and sending them to Martha's Vineyard.
So here's the real story on this.
Hit me.
Governor DeSantis used Florida taxpayer dollars. Oh, no. Yes, we said it. Florida taxpayer dollars.
Sure.
Sent buses to Texas, picked up people who were in, basically they're waiting to be processed, and drove them from Texas to Martha's Vineyard and dropped them off.
What was the point in that?
It's a political stunt.
Okay.
Quite frankly.
What trying to achieve what?
He was trying to make a point. I think if you look at, and I'm just thinking about where his base is, and, he's trying to run in a Republican primary. Quite frankly, I don't quite understand it. It would not be what I would do. But from his standpoint, maybe it showcased that he was trying to bring it to an area that was more left-leaning than right-leaning.
That encourages illegal immigration?
Well, no, I wouldn't put it that way. I would think that has a difference of opinion as to how to handle immigration.
Okay.
So Martha's Vineyard is one of the liberal bastions, Massachusetts in general, anywhere in the Northeast, generally speaking. Quite frankly, where we're sitting is quite different from the rest of the state politically.
In what way?
Politically. You look at your local elected officials. Palm Beach has some Republicans, but you look at Broward, and everyone has the opposite party of the governor in power.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at statewide elections, the biggest margins for Democrats in the state of Florida come from Broward County. I'm talking 200,000 to 300,000.
Interesting.
So, yeah, but when you have a bunch of little counties in different places and they all vote 90 to 10 the other way, it eats into that rather quickly, considering there's 67 counties in Florida.
67.
But anyways, we can move on from that piece.
No.
Yes.
Look, this stuff is stuff that people coming down here don't understand in the political front. They don't have an opinion on it. They don't understand it. Although I'd say that if you were to poll Canadians versus Americans, Canadians would have a much stronger grasp of American politics than the inverse.
Probably
right.
so.
So it's something that you need to understand, because depending what space you're in, you have to understand the lay of the land of where you're going.
I mean, the joke here is that the only thing we can recite about Canadian politics is the Canadian national anthem, because we hear it at Panthers games. So,
well, the truth is, I don't think you're going to be hearing very many national anthems in the next couple of weeks, because you're just about done. But that's my perspective of things.
Yeah, thanks.
We're not going to get into. We can probably debate hockey for hours.
For hours, yes.
And somehow you guys have, two good teams, and the province of Ontario can barely put together one.
What was that meme? Hug a Leaf fan?
Yeah. Again, we're not going to get into this.
We love Steve Dangle here too, but
You mentioned something to me about, first of all, rental rates.
Sure.
And then you a couple of times mentioned safety.
Correct.
And I know I don't want to, I can't talk about all of South Florida. You can speak to counties, but is Florida safer now than when you were a college student or a kid? And don't answer that yet. No, I'll explain to you why.
Sure,
because
sure.
From a Canadian perspective, probably New Yorkers, somewhat California, there is an image of lack of safety because of all the firearms and guns around here. I can tell you from my perspective in the world I live in, I've never felt unsafe for a second, even though I know that the overwhelming majority of people here does have firearms and the smaller minority carries. But is it safer now with all the immigration and people moving down here than it was when you were younger, or not?
Well, that's a tough question to answer, Ronan. I'm going to frame it in two ways, okay? The first way I would put it is, growing up down here, I'm sure you guys heard about Columbine back
Sure, of course.
and school shootings in general,
Right.
And that was really the first one. And, from a safety perspective, guns growing up here was not like, when I was in high school, I didn't even think about guns, right? Other than, it was something, I'd go to Maine to see my grandfather, and we go do some target practice, right?
Cool.
Because he was a sharpshooter in the military, in addition to being an engineer and all that stuff. So my only experiences with guns up until that, seminal moment, basically in American kind of politics as well, which was the first real deal. I mean, you got Jonesboro and other school shootings, but that was the one that people actually thought about, right? And I'd also throw in there, growing up down here from a safety perspective, when I was growing up here, was when you had the Jimmy Rice kidnapping, which was a terrible thing. You can look it up. I'm not going to go into the full details, but that kid was around my age growing up. And
I think there's a Netflix doc about it.
I'm sure there is. It was very sad, and it felt like almost a year they were trying to figure it out. Kid was picked up at a bus stop by some crazy lunatic and
it's always like
killed.
that, right?
But from there on, like, we used to ride our bikes to school. Well, we didn't ride our bikes to school anymore because we lived
and
half
what
a
age
mile.
would you be at that point?
I'm forgetting what I was in elementary, I want to say, at that time. Okay. When Jimmy Rice happened. Because I'm pretty sure I was elementary school, I want to say. Okay. I'd have to look at the dates, but
I don't want to. Okay, so.
But I remember growing up with that, and we used to ride our bikes to school, and that didn't happen anymore after that because people were rightly afraid, right? And then you go from that to today, where the firearms thing, obviously Parkland. Happened in Broward County.
Yeah.
I don't want to just get totally into the gun issue because we could be here all day.
I want to talk about overall safety. It's not just firearms, right?
But overall safety-wise, I'm just saying you could say that you're more safe or less safe. The reality is that there are challenges all around us, right? From a public safety perspective. You look at whether that's, Florida is no different from California in the fact that crime happens here. Or, we had a school shooting here, which, Do
you feel safe in Florida?
I do, with the caveat of I feel less safe with some of the legislation that has happened, which like the permitless carry stuff.
Can you elaborate on that?
So in Florida, you had what are called concealed weapons permits. I'm sure you've heard of those.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So you have to take a test and, get certified to carry, right?
Is it an arduous test? Is it difficult?
Not arduous, but you have to do it, right?
Okay.
Unlike a car, you don't have to get insurance on a weapon, right? To drive, arguably, we've had this conversation.
Sure.
You're driving a weapon, right?
Yeah, it can be.
Can be. Same thing with a gun. Can be that. I'm not for banning your right to own a firearm. I'm not for banning my friend Steve from owning a firearm.
Are you sure you're a Democrat?
But what I am opposed to is what they just passed, which is permitless carry, where you don't even have to basically take a test.
So I can walk into a store.
You could, as long as within the red flag laws. I don't believe it's been signed yet, but they'll sign that probably on July 1st. That's when they sign all bills by in the state of Florida legislatively. And I haven't read the full text, but basically you can walk into a store and they rolled back some of the things that they put into place after Parkland, apparently, which you would have to get a legislative expert on. But the fact that it would be easier of access to get a weapon, especially a high caliber weapon, not just your rinky-dink handgun or whatever.
They all kill the same way.
They all kill the same way. And
so you're telling me that they're making it easier for people to attain firearms.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And do you think having people responsibly well, no, I get that's priming the question in the wrong direction, so that wouldn't be fair. Do you think having more firearms or less firearms would make the place safer?
Well, I think that's a trick question in a lot of ways.
Sure,
what I would say, whether you want less or more firearms, doesn't matter. If a bad guy has a gun, they're still going to do harm with it, right? The key factor is what type of weapon are you able to obtain? If it's an AR-15, well, we look at a lot of the shootings throughout the country. That's kind of the weapon that's been used in, I guess, every one of them, or most of them, 95% of them. And to me, that's, we used to have an assault weapons ban in this country. We don't. They let it expire. The moment they let it expire, shootings went up.
Look, I do not want to give a platform just to firearms because that's a conversation with so many different perspectives and opinions. Of course. And that doesn't put the entire realm of what I would consider safety into the forefront of what I want to try to uncover here.
Yeah, of course.
I think that I have my perspective of things that I think that if no firearms existed, I'd be a very happy person. And great. People can still commit crimes with a variety of different weapons, including using their hands.
Yep.
But if it didn't exist at all, then I'd be okay with it. But since people have them, I think, responsible people should have them.
My personal opinion, and this is just for me, having grown up with a respect for weapons, for, as I said, my grandfather was a sharpshooter, basically, knew what he was doing with a firearm, right? I feel that if you're going to own a gun, you should have training as to,
but it's never about the responsible gun owner. It's never about the responsible person drinking and driving. It's right?
Sure, but does that, again, I think that my main point of view on this is it's never about the person who, whatever, but by putting those, safety standards into, being, whether that's to own a weapon, you have to be trained on it, whether that's going to actually learn how to, handle a gun, or whether you have to carry insurance on a weapon, right? Because let's face it, you can't drive a car without insurance, but you can own a weapon.
Yeah, I never thought about it from that perspective.
My point is that it's not about creating a barrier to owning it. It's about creating a way that people learn how to respect and utilize in the correct way a firearm. Okay? Most people say, well, it's my Second Amendment right. Yes. That
Truthfully,
is correct.
I'll tell you, I think that Florida didn't lock down during COVID like Canada did because people are armed. And there would be listen.
I don't know that I agree with that.
Sure, maybe. But, I mean, you guys were quite fortunate as a society that your businesses didn't get shut down for as long. Your schools weren't shut down for as long. You had access to a lot of things that other people didn't, including a lot of rights and freedoms that we supposedly had north of the border. Yeah. And it didn't matter which side you were on politically. Everybody did the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that on the COVID stuff. But I would also, and with the caveat on the COVID stuff, and this would take way longer than we have today, but Florida has a good PR team in a lot of ways. Yes, we were open earlier than others, but you also had a lot of issues that were just kind of left to local, control. So you wound up having places upstate that were wide open, way earlier. And then you have places downstate that, had overflowing hospitals and...
So do you think that was the right play to open things up? Or would you have preferred it the way they did it in Canada and lock everyone down?
I wouldn't prefer a lockdown. However, I think there could have been much more structure to what was done. Because the issue that you ran into in Florida was if I was in Broward, I could, things were semi-closed for a little while, but I would go 2 hours north of here to whatever small Florida county you want to, put it into whatever, and it was completely different.
Yeah, okay, but let's talk about the outcomes. Because now you've seen both, and we have the ability of look at things in hindsight. Was there, people dying in the streets because you were open? Were there these...
Well, quite frankly, I mean, looking back, if you look at it, our hospitals were overflowing. We had a brand new baby boy in the middle of all this. So, we had to deal with a lot of the issues that COVID, put forward, whether that was you couldn't leave the hospital or you couldn't have anybody visit or, all these different things. People think that, you could do, whatever in Florida whenever, right? But the reality was it was quite different at different times. And to your question as to whether it was right or wrong, I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is if you look at, I think it was, a year in, we got the first vaccine, right? Somewhere around there, right?
Yeah, something like that.
And once that happened, you start to see a little bit of this, going down, on there. And that helped with the different hospitals and they're being overstretched and what other things that you would see out there, you know, and rightly or wrongly, you look at it that way. That's kind of how I look at it. Broward was a lot more stringent than other places in the state. You know, same with Miami-Dade, same with Palm Beach, but the press that we get is that we were completely wide open, and I don't think it's a fair assertion. It's what marketed to a lot of folks that Florida is great and we're open.
Look,
and we were open earlier, but to ignore the, you know, the minutia of the response statewide is, you know, would be also like not, you know, really paying attention to it either.
You know, when I speak to you, it's very evident and especially Canadians listening.
Sure.
Is we do not really fully comprehend the scale of just the number of people in a state like Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Versus all of Canada. So when you have different opinions, different, like, you don't understand the variety of. When you say hospitals were overrun, maybe, but there's 23 million people in Florida, and that's not including high season.
Sure.
What is the unequivocally factual is that during this COVID wave that I think, you know, let's put it on DeSantis, who opened things up, and maybe there was him. I know that the cities had a lot to do with it.
Sure.
You know, that's how people perceive it, right?
You know, as they say, the buck stops somewhere, right?
Sure.
Buck stops here, right?
Right, and that's a good way to look at it. What I think has happened is Florida used to be the place you came to retire.
Of
In
course.
the twilight of your life, you came down here.
Absolutely.
What is absolute is the people that are moving down here. The demographic shift is immense. It's young families, professionals, young kids, and they're coming down here, and they've got the quote unquote right intentions. I don't care which side of the political, because politics.
I don't
at
really
the end,
care either.
Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. A good human's a good human. You can have a debate with someone.
You know, as they say, democracy is all about having different opinions and being able to share them at the dinner table and not like each other or like each other.
Yeah, but as long as your virtues are true,
sure,
you're trying to establish families, businesses, better communities, more safety,
absolutely,
better education. Who gives a shit which side of the platform you actually lean towards? And
I would agree with you wholeheartedly, by the way.
And I believe that the fact that it was open and there was the difference is not lockdown, COVID, science, all that stuff. It boils down to choice. And that's what Florida had that a lot of places worldwide didn't. And they were given the opportunity to make a decision for themselves based on the information that they had, plus what they thought was right. But with that, I think the demographic shift is towards people that have the right intentions into Florida. And the future, I think, it will be brighter. And it was a very smart move on DeSantis' part because he saw an opportunity to kind of replenish an aging population with younger people, and that's
yes and no.
Yeah, maybe, but there certainly is an element.
Arguable both ways.
Fine, but there is an element of that. Florida is no longer perceived, South Florida, as the place you came to retire.
I mean, it's arguable that before the pandemic that had already started. But
there is no doubt.
But even so,
fuel on the fire.
You are correct when you said he poured gasoline on the fire.
Absolutely. And that's where I see the opportunity. That's where I see the potential of this place. I think Florida is like the gold rush. I see like so much more opportunity here.
You got to remember the history though, right?
Of what? The gold rush?
South Florida.
Yeah. So
which is the boom and bust, you know?
But that's the United States. That's capitalism.
But Florida is much more than just, you know. Okay, so think about it this way. In 2008, right? Financial crisis.
Sure. Oh, everybody got smoked then.
Yeah, we had how many years glut of condos and stuff built? I would go into downtown Miami. No joke. You go see all the high rises, there'd be 3 lights on, right?
Right.
I mean, or you go back to the 20s when you had land speculation here.
Sure.
Or you go back to the 40s where, you know, it was roaring, and then all of a sudden the 50s tanked. The question is, do you think it's sustainable? I think it's very much so sustainable. I think you got some different factors here comparatively. You look at, if you're a college student, for instance, right now, and you want to get involved in the tech sector, right? Those companies are coming here. You want to get involved in the financial sector. Well, you could go to Brickell. Brickell is a financial center for the Americas, right? You have a lot more stability here, company-wise, than you did previously. I say that from a government perspective, looking at, these numbers, you look at what the Alliance put out, the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, they put out different things. You can look it up. I mean, they have, talk about like the Levan Center up at FAU or Nova. I forget which one. Sorry, since we don't have all my data in front of me. But you look at the different things that are out there tools-wise. If you want to get involved and, stay in the community, you can do that. It used to be when I was growing up here, you would maybe go away because you didn't see as much opportunity, right?
Right.
I went away to school, obviously, in Boston. Part of the reason I went to Boston was I wanted something different, but part of the reason I went, too, was I saw a little more opportunity. Yes, I boomeranged back here because I didn't like snow, but, the fact is not lost on me that there is so much more opportunity today, educationally and economically, for you to go forward because things are being built out.
I want to leave it on that note because I'm tempted very much to debate you on a lot of these things. But what I do want to do is I want to have you back because
absolutely.
There's so many more things I could pick your brain on. But from an overall perspective, I got to tell you, I'm thankful and grateful to have met you. Your perspective, your support, and the fact that you took time out of your day to come and provide a resource to people in South Florida from somebody who's not a transplant, so doesn't have this staunch opinion, and I'm grateful.
Few and far between,
right? So I'm gonna leave it on this note and go Leafs go, and Kyle, thank you so much for your time.
At least it's not go Habs go, so we're good.
Never. All right,
see you, my friend.
Take it easy.
Bye bye.